Winter in the medieval mountains was not just a season, it was a predator. A single night of wind could strip the warmth from a human body faster than hunger or exhaustion ever could. For the shepherds who lived far from villages, far from stone walls and roaring hearths, winter was a silent challenger waiting outside the door. Their shelters were nothing more than grass huts, thin enough for moonlight to pass through, flimsy enough that a heavy snowfall could make the roof groan. To us, it sounds impossible. To sleep on the ground, with no bed, no real fire, and no insulation except what you could gather from the land. It feels less like resting and more like stepping willingly toward death. Yet somehow, they survived. Night after night, season after season. In an age before modern gear, before insulated boots or high-tech jackets, these shepherds endured winters colder than most of us will ever experience. The climate itself was harsher. Many regions were slipping into the early shadows of a colder era, when storms were sharper, winds more violent, and the nights stretched longer than memory. And still, ordinary people faced this cold with nothing but what nature offered and what tradition taught them. So how did they do it? How did a lone shepherd, isolated in darkness with only his flock beside him, create enough warmth to endure until dawn? Today, we uncover 7 forgotten techniques, simple, clever, and powerful enough to keep a human alive when the world outside wanted them frozen. When a shepherd prepared to sleep, the first enemy was not the wind or the darkness. It was the ground itself. Frozen earth is a ruthless thief, pulling heat out of a human body hour after hour until nothing remains. Medieval shepherds understood this long before science explained it. They knew that lying directly on cold soil was an invitation for the cold to climb into their bones. So they fought back using one of the simplest and most abundant materials in their world, straw. They didn't sprinkle a thin layer. They piled it deep, sometimes 20 to 40 centimeters, stamping it down into a thick, uneven mattress. Each stalk of straw hides tiny hollow chambers, and when bundled together those chambers trap still air, forming a natural insulating barrier. Today, we would call it an R-value. Back then, it was simply survival. Archaeologists across Scandinavia and the remnants of Viking settlements have found packed layers of straw on ancient hut floors, proof of a technique passed down for centuries. After harvest season, straw was everywhere, and shepherds used it for everything: roofing, bedding, even makeshift walls. They learned to flip the straw every few weeks to prevent moisture from creeping in, turning their crude sleeping area into a primitive but effective thermal shield. It wasn't comfortable. It smelled of fields and livestock. It scratched exposed skin and crackled beneath every movement. But comfort was never the goal. Without that thick bed of straw, a shepherd's body heat drained into the earth until dawn became a distant hope. With it, he created a small pocket of warmth strong enough to hold on to life for just one more night. But even with straw beneath him, the night did not let go easily. Fire was a luxury that never lasted long. Wood burned down quickly, and no shepherd could afford to keep feeding the flames until morning. As the fire shrank to glowing embers, the temperature inside a hut could plummet. The solution came from an understanding older than written history: the power of heated stones. Shepherds collected dense river stones and mountain rocks like granite and basalt, materials known today for their ability to absorb and store heat. They buried them deep in the fire until the stones glowed faintly red, then lifted them out using sticks or cloth-wrapped tongs. These stones were slid beneath straw bedding or placed near where they slept. Hours after the fire died, the stones continued to radiate warmth, releasing the heat they had captured. This technique appears in cultures across the world, from Inuit households to traditional Japanese homes in the Edo period, proving its timeless effectiveness. Choosing the wrong stone could be dangerous. Damp rocks could crack or even burst when heated, and poorly wrapped stones could scorch skin. But when chosen carefully, these glowing cores of heat became silent guardians through the night, stretching precious warmth into the coldest hours before dawn. Even with warmth rising from the ground and glowing stones tucked beneath their bedding, a shepherd still had to protect the most vulnerable source of heat he possessed: his own body, and for that, nothing mattered more than the cloak he wrapped around himself. Medieval wool cloaks were not fashion. They were survival systems, woven from thick, oily wool still rich with natural lanolin. These cloaks repelled moisture, blocked wind, and created a tiny pocket of warm air around the body. But there was one crucial detail, often overlooked in modern imagination: the brooch. That simple pin was the difference between life and death. Left loose, a cloak fluttered in the wind and opened gaps where cold air could rush in, stealing warmth in minutes. But fastened with a metal brooch, just as Celtic, Germanic, and Viking shepherds had done for centuries, the cloak sealed shut. It became a cocoon, a primitive sleeping bag that trapped body heat and let the wearer breathe into his own microclimate. Archaeologists have uncovered brooches with spirals, knots, and carved patterns, small signs of identity that shepherds carried with them everywhere. But behind every design was a single purpose: keep the warm air in, keep the winter out. Wrapped tightly, the shepherd felt the faint warmth of his own breath rise and fall inside the cloak, returning to him as if the garment itself were alive. In the worst nights, that warmth was all he had. But warmth did not only come from above the body, it came from below. Beneath the cloak and straw mattress, shepherds relied on an ancient engineering trick few people today even recognize: the heated earthbed. Across Alpine and Scandinavian regions, families flattened the soil inside their huts and packed it down until it hardened into a smooth, dense platform. This wasn't just for stability. Packed earth holds heat with surprising efficiency. During the day, shepherds built their fires directly on the floor or allowed sunlight to soak into the ground. The soil slowly absorbed the heat, storing it deep within, and when the fire died at night, the ground released that warmth back into the hut, just enough to soften the worst of the cold. Some communities even mixed ash into the soil to pull moisture away and help the floor dry faster, strengthening its ability to hold warmth. It was the earliest form of underfloor heating, centuries before anyone dreamed of pipes or boilers. It wasn't comfortable. Sleeping on packed earth felt like resting on stone. But in the dead of winter, comfort was irrelevant. What mattered was the faint warmth rising through straw and wool, a steady reminder that even the ground beneath them was fighting alongside them against the cold. But even with a warm cloak, a heated floor, and layers of straw beneath them, shepherds still faced one of winter's most dangerous threats: the attack on exposed skin. Frostbite did not negotiate. It claimed ears, noses, cheeks, and fingers long before a person even realized the damage had begun. And so, medieval shepherds turned to a method that sounds strange to us today, but was born from generations of observation. They coated their skin with animal fat mixed with fine ash from the hearth. This wasn't grooming. It was armor. Fat created a greasy, hydrophobic shield that locked moisture inside the skin and blocked the cutting wind. The natural oils, much like the lanolin found in raw wool, kept the surface from drying and cracking in the cold. Ash added another layer of protection. Soft woods like birch produced ash filled with microscopic carbon particles. When mixed into the fat, those particles clung to the skin, darkening it slightly and improving heat absorption. Across Russia, Mongolia, and the far north of Europe, this mixture appeared again and again, a shared instinct across cultures facing brutal winters. It didn't smell pleasant. It left a smoky residue on the face and hands, but scent didn't matter. Out in the open, guiding sheep across frozen ground, that oily coating slowed the creeping freeze long enough to save skin, and sometimes save lives. In the mountains, a shepherd didn't care how he looked. He cared that, by morning, his ears were still attached. Warm skin was only part of the battle. A shepherd still had to protect the part of his body that touched the frozen world with every step his feet. Medieval shoes were little more than thin leather wrapped around the sole, and leather alone offers almost no insulation. The cold seeped through it fast, numbing the toes and slowing circulation until frostbite became inevitable. To survive, shepherds invented a simple but brilliant system that turned their footwear into a crude version of modern thermal boots. They wrapped their feet in long strips of linen or wool, winding the cloth tightly from toe to ankle. Then they packed handfuls of dry straw inside the wrapping, tucking it between layers of fabric so it stayed in place. The science behind it is the same principle used in today's insulated hiking shoes: trap air, save heat. Each stalk of straw held tiny pockets of still air, forming a warm barrier between skin and leather. Archaeological digs in places like Novgorod and the ancient Scottish settlement of Skara Brae reveal fragments of cloth and straw inside centuries-old shoes, proof of how widely this method was used. In some regions, shepherds mixed in soft forest moss to absorb moisture, improving insulation even more. It wasn't elegant. As they walked, the straw squeaked softly, leaving behind tiny bits with every step, but that sound meant warmth, and in the bitter cold of the mountains, warm feet weren't a comfort. They were your ability to stand, walk, herd, and survive. Still, the cold always pushed back. On the harshest nights, even straw, wool, and fire-warmed stones were not enough. When temperatures plunged below zero and the wind turned vicious, shepherds used the one heat source stronger than any tool or flame: their flock. They brought lambs and sometimes full-grown sheep into the hut, letting the animals crowd around them as they slept. It might sound chaotic, even humorous, imagining a shepherd curled beneath a cloak while a half-dozen sheep pressed close. But each animal radiated warmth around 80 to 120 watts, similar to a small heater. In a tightly sealed hut, that body heat built up fast, creating a microclimate just warm enough to keep frostbite from sinking in. This technique wasn't unique to Europe. Himalayan herders, Lapland families, and Andean communities all slept beside their animals during the coldest seasons. Across cultures, the logic was the same. Life supports life. In the darkness, the shepherd felt the warmth of wool pressed against his legs and heard the slow breathing of the animals around him. Their heat rose into the air, forming a faint mist that hovered beneath the thatched roof. It was messy, noisy, and far from the clean comfort we imagine today. But for a shepherd facing a mountain winter, that living furnace could mean the difference between waking up and never waking again. When you look at all these methods together, straw on the floor, stones heated in the fire, cloaks pinned tight, earth warmed beneath the bedding, fat and ash on the skin, straw packed inside shoes, and sheep brought into the hut, it becomes clear that none of it was random. Medieval shepherds weren't inventing tricks to be clever. They were preserving knowledge passed down through countless winters, each generation adding a small lesson carved from experience, hardship, and survival. Every technique was a memory, a reminder of someone who had once faced the same cold, the same darkness, and refused to let the mountain take them. What these shepherds created was not comfort. It was a system, a layered defense built from whatever the land would give them. Straw became insulation, earth became a heater, animals became partners in survival, and the human body, wrapped in wool and stubborn determination, supplied the final spark that kept life going in a world that was constantly trying to freeze it out. They didn't have technology, they didn't have modern gear, but they had creativity, resourcefulness, and the will to endure. Today, we rarely think about the cold as a threat. We step into heated homes, zip up insulated jackets, and forget what it means to fight for warmth. But the shepherds who lived in the mountains didn't have that luxury. Their nights were long, their storms were brutal, and every choice they made had to stack together into one simple goal: make it to morning. So here is the question. If you were placed in a grass hut on a frozen mountain, with nothing but straw, fire, wool, and your flock for warmth, could you last even one night? Or would the cold claim you before midnight? Let me know what you think. And if you want to explore more forgotten skills that helped our ancestors survive when the world was harsher than we remember, make sure to follow along. Winter always returns, and so do its lessons.